Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for episode 22 of season 5 of Black Writers Read. My name is Nicole Young-Martin. I'm the founder, producer, and host for this series. So you may be hearing my co-hosts, our two dogs, in a couple of minutes because there's foot traffic outside and they have to police the castle. So, but anywho, spring has officially arrived in New England. Yet another reason for my cough to continue. So for folks who have been following me for a long time, I've had a lingering cough since COVID in 2021. We're going to ride with it, see how it goes. I met with students earlier today and was coughing up a storm. But I hope we're going to be good because I just kind of dosed myself up with some sinus stuff. So I am extremely excited to convene with you all this evening for today's conversation. I've had this book on my shelf for I don't know how long, and it is such an honor and a privilege to have today's guest on to talk about this beautiful work. So let's go ahead and get started. Black Writers Read showcase. Let me start over because that is not the tagline. Black Writers Read showcases, celebrates, and honor the words, work, and traditions of Black writers from across the country, across genres, across experiences, and across the African diaspora. Black Writers Read is a behind-the-scenes conversation into the craft and what it means to create as a Black author in today's society. Since starting the series during the summer of 2020, we've hosted over 80 authors representing over 15 genres from 5 countries and 24 states. Our platform includes the live stream interviews, audio podcasts, book clubs, and curriculum integration assistance. Find us online at blackwritersread.com. Today, we welcome Essie Chambers. Essie Chambers is an award-winning author and producer. Her debut novel, Swift River, a Today Show Read with Jenna book club pick, won the 2024 Barnes & Noble Discover Prize and was named a Best Book of the Year by The Washington Post, NPR, the Boston Globe, Elle, and others. It was also longlisted for the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction and the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize, and was a finalist for an NAACP Image Award, the Libby Awards, the New England Book Awards, and the Barnes & Noble Book of the Year. She received an Honor Fiction Award from the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. This is huge because the book has been out since less than a year. It came out in June of last year. Essie started her career as a television executive at Nickelodeon, The N, and BET before becoming an independent producer and filmmaker. She went on to produce the critically acclaimed PBS documentary, The New Public, and the Sundance Award-winning Oscar-shortlisted documentary, Descendant, which was released by the Obama's Higher Ground production company and Netflix in 2022. It is available for you to view on Netflix. She earned her MFA in creative writing from Columbia University and has received fellowships from MacDowell, the Vermont Studio Center, and Baldwin for the Arts. She lives in Brooklyn, New York, where she's about to start on book number 2. Today, we'll chat about Swift River. It's the summer of 1987 in Swift River, and Diamond Newberry is learning how to drive. Ever since her pop disappeared 7 years ago, she and her mother hitchhike everywhere they go, but that's not the only reason Diamond stands out. She's teased relentlessly about her weight, and since Pop's been gone, she is the only Black person in all of Swift River. This summer, Ma is determined to declare Pop legally dead so they can collect his life insurance money, get their house back from the bank, and finally move on. But when Diamond receives a letter from a relative she's never met, key elements of Pop's life are uncovered, and she is introduced to 2 generations of African-American Newberry women whose lives span the 20th century and reveal a much larger picture of prejudice and abandonment, of love and devotion. As pieces of their shared past become clearer, Diamond gains a sense of her place in the world and in her family. But how will what she's learned of the past change her future? Published by Simon & Schuster in June of 2024, Swift River heralds the arrival of a major new literary talent. Also, folks, I would love to announce that the paperback version of Swift River is scheduled for release on May 5th. To learn more about Essie, please visit her website at essiechambers.com. During our time together today, I will be sharing the link to her website and also to find her on Instagram. I want to give a special thanks and shout out to Elle Mirapol for connecting me with Essie. For those of you who are new to Black Writers Read, here's the format of the series. Essie will share an excerpt from her work. We'll chat about it, and if time remains at the end of the conversation, we'll open it up to Q&A for those of you who are joining us today. We typically have folks joining us from Facebook and YouTube. If you have a question, please feel free to include it in the comment section on the platform where you're joining us from today. I will compile the questions and either pose them to our guests following our conversation or insert them during an appropriate time within our chat. So I mentioned this to our guests when we were talking pre-show. When you buy the book, I want you to flip to the acknowledgement section first. I think it's really important for us to take a moment to acknowledge the folks who are pivotal in our community. And I absolutely love the people who have supported her through this journey. So I'd now like to welcome Essie Chambers to the virtual stage. Hello.
Hello. What an intro. Thank you, Nicole.
What an intro. What amazing work you've done.
Thank you. And you. I'm so honored to be here. I have to tell you, like, how many did you say you've done? 80 author interviews?
Yes, since I started, I started Juneteenth in 2020. I've had about 80 some people on it.
Wow. Well, congratulations. This is such a important platform and community that you're building. So I'm honored to be here.
Thank you. And I'm so excited for you to read. So I'm going to turn it over to you to read. Next, I'll come back for us to chat. So enjoy reading.
Okay, cool. I'm going to start. I think what's probably easiest is if I just read. There are a couple of different voices in this book, and I think I'm going to read from the prologue, which is going to set up all of the different layers of the story, and then I'm going to read a little bit of the first chapter, which is in the voice of Diamond Newberry, the 16-year-old girl, because it's a very different kind of a voice. So just a little bit of taste of that, but I don't want to bore you. So that's where I'm going to start. Okay. I never read this part. Someone Inside Me Remembers that's from Far Memory by Lucille Clifton. I love that so much. Okay, prologue. Picture my pop sneakers, worn out and mud-caked from gardening, neatly positioned on the riverbank where the grass meets the sand. This is the place where the swift river is at its widest and deepest, where a jungly mix of trees makes you feel like you're all alone in the wild somewhere, even though the road is so close you can hear cars humming on the other side. We'd come here as a family on hot summer nights, the one spot where we could splash around freely without people staring at our black, white, and brown parts. Ma even swam naked sometimes, her pale body like a light trail moving through the dark water. Pop couldn't swim. He'd stand hip deep, hold me high in the air, and launch me out from his arms like a cannonball. Over and over again, I'd paddle back, his proud fluorescent smile, my beacon. July 1st, the current is extra strong and the water is churning, restless, as my grandma Sylvia would say, from summer rains. Pop leaves early that morning, long before Ma and me are out of bed. He forgets to make me breakfast before he goes. He leaves the car in the driveway. When Ma comes downstairs, she frowns at the door, wrestling with something on the other side of it. She moves to the window and beams her worried look out into the distance. I decide not to put sugar on my cereal, even though no one's looking. Answers come to questions I don't ask. There isn't enough gas in the car for both her and Pop. She has to get to her job, and he has to go find one. He must be off on foot somewhere. 2 days later, his shoes turn up. Tucked inside them, his wallet and house keys. Pop is gone. All through the next week, men in boats drag long hooks and nets across the river. They look like the fishermen we saw in Cape Cod 2 summers ago, except these nets are out to snag a person, my person. The men pull out a tricycle, a mattress, and a dead deer whose antlers were stuck in the mud, but no Pop. The search moves outward from the water, farther and farther away from those sneakers, to the deepest parts of the surrounding woods, to the abandoned factories up and down the river, to hunters' cabins and tool sheds, under porches and inside our house, all through the dank, dirty basement Pop wanted to turn into a TV room one day. Then back to the water again, where it fizzles. Soon summer is gone too. Fall comes and I start the 4th grade, life snapping back to its normal ways as if I don't have a missing dad and a mom who's afraid to let me leave the house but also forgets to feed me. At school, we read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, I am the tallest and the smartest one in my class. I am also the only Black person at school, and now that Pop is gone, the only Black person in the whole town. The kids call my dad Nigger Jim because he's Black, he's somewhere in a river, and he has no shoes. Mrs. Durkin hands out detentions, hugs me, and pulls her long fingernails through my knotted curls, saying, "Kids can be so cruel, but if you just ignore them, they'll leave you alone." I cry into her chest because she's so nice and so wrong, and I wish I didn't know this with such certainty. Pop stays gone. Gone hangs in the air without landing, and after a time, a summer, a fall, a summer, gives permission to fill in gaps with meanness and nonsense. Like, Pop was murdered by a racist serial killer who scalped him and used his afro as a dust mop. Or he went for a swim and was pulled out to sea by a water Sasquatch. Or he faked his own death and is off somewhere else with the stolen money, a new life, and a new white wife. Years pass and the story turns one last time. Now Ma and me are the beasts. We hitchhike through town seducing men, robbing them and jumping out of moving cars. We wander along the banks of the river at night, looking for some secret thing my father buried before he took off. When the fireflies are so thick they look like mini lanterns, and a stray pulse catches a passing car, they say that's us, Diamond and Ma, up to their old tricks, out with their flashlights digging for treasure. I don't hear this dumb shit until I am long gone from that place. Back to us three. Before I am a river beast, before the kids hold their breath as they pass my house, before I lose my name altogether, before all of this, I am a small brown girl in the back seat of a VW Bug, watching the pavement flash through the rust holes in the car floor like it's TV. Ma and Pop are in the front. "Cut that out," Ma says without turning around, as I toss things through the holes experimentally. A smooth stone from the river, a penny, a broken Happy Meal toy. They clack against the bottom of the car. We are on one of our Sunday 2 days after payday full tank of gas drives, a family luxury. I lift my head to catch the side of the road action flying by. Farm stands and yard sales, wood piles and jerry-rigged rabbit coops, dumb dogs tied to trees, choking themselves trying to nip at our tires. "What if we keep going and just never come back?" Pop asks us. "What about my toys?" I say after some thinking. "Come on now, we can always get more toys," he says, winking at me in the rearview mirror. "We can't leave my mother alone in this town," Ma says. She's not in on the joke. "We can always get another mother," Pop says. I can't see Ma's face, but when Pop reaches out to touch her cheek, she swats it away with her hand. "Diamond and her toys need space in the back seat, so we'll have to strap Sylvia to the roof," he says. I picture one of Grandma's beige stocking legs, thick ankles puffed out around her sparkly dancing shoes, dangling next to my window. Ma tries not to crack, but when she chuckles, her whole body shakes. Time is bent. Everything I could ever want is in this car, except for Grandma Sylvia. I calculate that loss and decide to embrace what's here. Ma's feet out the window, her donkey laugh, Pop's off-pitch humming of no recognizable song, his big hands rubbing the back of Ma's neck with careful fingers, like he's afraid he might snap it. Time is shaken. We've never even lived in this town. We're just passing through. Where we're from, all the people are kind and brown like me. Simon and Garfunkel on the radio, the only living boy in New York. I am the only living girl in Swift River Valley. A mosquito trapped in the car chomps out a constellation on my legs. I dig into the pink bumps with my nails, carving out tiny blood crosses. I'm excited for the scabs to come so I can pick them. "Should we keep on going, Sweet Pea?" Pop says again, looking in the back seat at me. Ma, the nag, is locked out of the conversation now. Yes, 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 I say, stomping my feet against the front seat partition. Keep going. Time is folded in half. There is no us three. Black people live here. They call this town home. They are mill workers and cobblers, carpenters and servants. A Negro church sits next to a Negro schoolhouse. The mill bell carves up their days. They fill the streets of the quarters, voices calling out to each other, mornin' and evenin'. Clotheslines stretch across yards like flags marking a black land. In one night, they're gone. Those were my people. This isn't a mystery or a legend. It's a story about leaving. It starts with my body. My body is a map of the world. Chapter 1, 1987. The summer after I turned 16, I am so fat I can't ride my bike anymore, so I let it get stolen on purpose. "You got a new boyfriend?" Ma, the smartass, yells out the living room window, laughing through her smoker's cough when she sees me lying on the ground in front of our house, wrapped around the bike with a bucket and a cleaning rag. "You humping that thing?" she asks. I ignore her, and she leaves me be, puffing away on her Newports, a faceless blob in the dirty window screen. The whole house looks like it's having a cigarette. It's hot out, and the bike is fiery from lying in the yard all morning. I'm curled around the frame so I can get to all of its parts. It's the only position my body will allow. I scrub at the street grime until a bright red frame pokes through for the first time in years. It mocks the rest of the junk around it. Skeleton lawn chairs, broken push mower, Pop's dead car in the driveway. "You trapped under there?" Ma shouts as she watches me struggling to stand. She is testing my forgiveness with her stupid jokes. An hour ago, she told me if she got herself fired again, this time for telling off her boss at the fertilizer store after he refused to pay for another sick day. Now we will all have to live off my check from the TP motel, the same job she had when I was little. I keep reminding her we'll have to choose between electricity and heat once the winter comes, but she tells me not to worry myself, that adults plan things and their kids don't always know about it. "I have my ways," she sings from her crater in the couch. Ma is a break in the long line of a family who worked the same one job their whole lives. I am a break in their pure Irish stock. The first Black person, the end of the whites. "Something blocking your ears?" she tries again. I decide I will not speak to her for 2 days. As I push myself onto all fours, a laser-like sun ray jumps across my hand, spilling onto the grass in front of me. I turn to see my neighbor and her friends, dumb freshman girls, out on the front lawn in fluorescent bathing suits, laughing and trying to beam me with the tinfoil tanning reflectors they hold under their chins. They're close, only 2 houses away, but their faces are a blur of baby oil and braces. I like to think if I wanted to, I could stroll over there and dump my dirty bike water on their ratty towels and pale, greasy bodies, slap a face or two. But I'm not like Pop. I can't fight everything, everyone. "Thank you for all our times together." I touch the wheel of my bike. "I made you pretty again. You're free." I'll stop there.
I absolutely love. Oh, my beagle is gnawing at me right now. I absolutely love hearing this aloud. It
Oh, thank you.
resonates so differently off the page, and I can see why in some interviews that I've watched with you, some people are like, "Is this going to be optioned for a film?" Because it lives differently activated off the page.
Thank you for saying that. Well, also I'm a musician in my heart, so I really like the rhythm and like the musicality of it. I mean, it matters a lot to me. So reading it out loud as I'm writing is as important. I mean, that's most writers, but it's very important to me that it sound that flow in a certain way. So
Nice. So the first question that I have for you is, what is the origin story of Swift River? Why this title and why the story right now?
okay, well let me take one of those at a time. So the origin story, I think I think we talked about this. I worked on this book for I mean, like 9 years, I say, but maybe close to 10 or 11. I mean, it was just, it took me a long time to finish this. So different parts of the book came to me at different parts in my life and in this process. I love stories about outsiders, about people looking for belonging and home and who kind of don't fit in. And so I've kind of always had Diamond's voice in my head, but the real kernel was, which I think is pretty universal, is the experience of being the only one in an environment where you stand out in some fundamental way. I wanted to look at what it meant to kind of like fold yourself in half in order to belong. What the parts of you that you leave behind, the parts that maybe don't ever develop because of this. And more specifically, I would say, and this is similar to the way that I grew up, being the only Black person in an all-white environment. And so this is fiction. This is completely made up, but I like to say, like, my experience in the way that I grew up is kind of like the emotional engine underneath all of this. It's what I pull from to feel something about what I was writing.
Yeah.
I grew up in a small town in Western Massachusetts where my family was one of very few families of color. And so it was what I was pulling from was how complicated it is to have your home be a place where you don't fit in, to have your, we experienced all kinds of violence that came from all different places. But I think what was most confusing was when it came from people that we loved and depended on in some kind of way. And that kind of disorienting feeling of needing to swallow stuff in order to just belong and be a part of your world. All of that stuff is what I wanted to write about. So I would say that's where it started. And then, and because I was pulling on my own growing up experience, I kind of knew that I wanted it to be a coming of age. And it was research that brought me to the other pieces of the book that I can talk about a little bit later.
Yeah.
But that, the first impulse really it came from my life. And then what the second part of your
The title.
The title. Well, interestingly enough, so I did not come up with the title. I have to give credit to my agent, my brilliant agent. The original title that I had, it wouldn't have made sense unless you read the book. And so she very wisely said, we needed something else, and she suggested it. And what I loved about the title, it is not about the town. The town never gets redemption in this book. It's about the river, the actual river in the book, and rivers in general. I mean, I feel like, rivers are a place, particularly in mill towns, of so much life and force and power, and communities depend on them. And then just spiritually, it's about, renewal and rebirth and redemption. And particularly in Black culture, it occupies so much space in stories and folklore and spirituals. And so all of that I was thinking about when we settled on Swift River as a title, that it was about the life force of this river that went through this town that caused a lot of pain to a lot of people.
Wow. And so for folks who are joining for the first time, just a little backstory on me. And this is another reason why I attached to the book, one, because I love coming of age stories, and that's a question that I have coming up. But I grew up in Detroit, and I've lived in New England, specifically relocating first to Western Massachusetts for about 12 years or so before I moved to Connecticut. And what I love about Swift River and the town that you created, it can be a composite. It's a composite of so many different towns in Western Mass. So for folks, I highly recommend you research Holyoke, Massachusetts. That's a city I lived in for a little bit. I actually worked in Holyoke, and Holyoke is one of those former mill towns. What's really powerful about Holyoke is the communities of color that have located there, and also the fact that because of the location of the Connecticut River, they actually use that as their own power and water source, which I think is so powerful. And I don't know how long that's been the case. And also just seeing like how a lot of businesses are repurposing the abandoned mill buildings in Holyoke is it's a very cool story. But like Swift River, it literally feels like like Lynn. I was hearing like Lynn, Lawrence, Conway.
Yeah. I mean, it really was if you're from Western Massachusetts, there is a very particular thing. First of all, I can say this because I'm from Western Massachusetts. It's weird. Like, there's strange
stuff.
It's weird. And I, with all the love in my heart, I love weird people. I love weird, like, it's more to pull from, but it's weird, and it's haunted in ways, I think, particularly former mill towns, because you have this industry that supported community, and then it left behind very visually. I mean, the factory buildings that you mentioned, they were all over, sort of like these ghosts standing, representing a life that wasn't there anymore. And I love that idea, particularly since this family is haunted by these mysteries, and this community is haunted by mysteries. I wanted to pull from that sense of a town that was haunted. And I couldn't, I wanted to make, I really was thinking like Conway and Lee and Lennox, and all that, but I wanted to make it much more rural. And so I did, so Turner's Falls is also, which is close to where I grew up, is also another thing, another town that I did a lot of research on, just on mill life there. But yeah, all of that stuff, you will recognize, if you're from Western Massachusetts, you'll recognize how I pulled from the different places.
Yeah, and also I love, like, because I say that I grew up in Western Mass because I moved out here right after my first graduate degree, and I moved out here in my late 20s. But like there was just so much I was able to connect with the book in terms of just like, and I think a lot of people don't really know this because the 5 colleges get so hyped in this region. There is a lot of poverty in the region because of the mill industries that have left. And also there's a lot of hush around history too. Like because I lived in Amherst for 8 years, and I did not know that there was manufacturing in North Amherst until recently.
Yeah.
So also too, I think the towns hold a lot of secrets, and I'm curious of the why. So you have, and I can see why, other than like lives, but given the richness of how you wrote Swift River, I can see why it took so long to write, just so that you pay homage to the towns that act as a composite for the town in the book.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think I'm trying to think of what point I really leaned into that. I mean, when I knew that Swift River itself was going to be very much a character, I think probably after, it started off as a coming of age story, as it was a short story when I was in grad school, and they said, my workshop folks said, this is a book, this is a novel. And so that was when I first started thinking about it as something longer, and I worked on it still for many, many years after that. And and when I started thinking about creating a history for the Black part of this family, that's when I stumbled across a lot of this stuff. I can talk about that whenever, but the research really led me to a major part of this book.
Yeah. So the next question that I have is, so one of my favorite subgenres is the coming of age narrative. I would love to know why your debut novel is a coming of age story, and how do you think this narrative in Swift River introduces your voice as an author?
Oh, I'm so happy you love coming of age like I do. I didn't know that I was going to be writing a coming of age story, but I will say that I am very much drawn to this moment in life. I think, I worked in television for years for a teen channel, and we made shows like Degrassi and South of Nowhere, and all. I feel like it is such a rich moment in life. I talk to people and I say, do you remember what it's like to feel, to be 16? And it's just, it's so much pain and so much joy. And it's not hard to find drama because of the way that you feel things so deeply at that age. I mean, you think you invented pain and love and all the things, like nobody's ever experienced it before. It's just so I knew that it would be such a rich place to mine. And I already understood how to tell, because I've been doing it for years in television, and I respected the voice and the fact that it needed to be nuanced and authentic, or it wouldn't work. It couldn't be like that, wise beyond her years. It could, and so I think because I was writing a voice that for a person that I no longer was, in a moment in life, that I worked extra hard on getting that voice right. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think that like sort of the gap between the reader and what they know that the young person doesn't know is interesting, and that tension and minding that tension. And I think I really like the idea of doing something in first person present. So the fact that it's happening over it's only happened over a 3-month period of time. So not a lot can happen in 3 months. And so that I could be really present and take the reader through everything that was happening to this girl and the ways that her life was really transforming in that period of time, in only, like the way that a summer when you are 16, when that can happen.
And also, what I love about the first person narrative in this case, and I talk a lot about this to my students, is that like really sit with the character and observe the world as she's observing it. And I'm like, Diamond is so smart. I'm like, and just the like so observant, and the things that she says to her mother and on behalf of her mother is so interesting.
Thank you. I felt like I was channeling her at times. I mean, it really, I talk about this all the time. I always have a Post-it on my computer that says, "Tell the truth and make yourself laugh." And I do think that Diamond was my probably most, I don't think I've ever been able to be honest in a way that I was with her. I felt like as a writer, yeah, I wanted her to be expressing a kind of truth, particularly since you're with her internally, obviously, and she wasn't comfortable saying all of the things yet to the people in her life, and that's part of her journey over the course of the summer, is getting her own voice. And so so yeah, but with Ma, she tangled, and so
Yes.
you see, she and Ma, they tussled. That was a lot of fun to write that relationship, because we all remember how hard it was to to be changing in all these different ways, and then there's your parents right there, embarrassing you and all the other things. And for Diamond, she doesn't have anybody else. And so
Yeah.
can you imagine going through all of that stuff? And then that's the only person that you have. And so that was an extra level of drama and, and humor too. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of pain in the book, but it was an opportunity for me, particularly with all the, the weirdness of the town, and all, to find comedy too.
Which I want to skip a question, given that you mentioned her mother. I loved this relationship because it reminded me of me and my mother, the adventures that we went on when I was a kid, because I was an only child for a long, like 15 years. So
Wow.
yeah, and like I was fortunate in that even though both of my parents, they were together, they worked a lot, but they always seemed to find time for me. And it would always be like individual. Like my dad would work, so my mom would have me. Mom would work, so dad has.
Oh,
And
that's
my
nice.
yeah, and because my mom didn't drive, we had a lot of similar adventures. Time in her
Hard.
mom.
In a small town. Yeah, I mean, that's it right there. It's interesting. Like my parents were nothing like these parents, and I really, the Ma character, I was so afraid that my mother would see herself in this book that I intentionally made the Ma as crazy as she was, so that my mother is as sane as Ma is kind of nutty and crazy. My mom was very much a rock. So I just have to say that. And success, she did not say, because she was so different. The experience was so different from my own. But one of the first images that I have, I'm a very visual writer, as you pointed out, and I sometimes will see something before I even know what it is. And one of the first things I saw is Diamond and her mother walking along the side of the road in this small town, and I felt I didn't know what that meant or what it was, but I felt so protective of them, because to your point, there is nothing more vulnerable than being on the side of the road in a town where everybody has a car and everybody drives. And so it felt like such a fraught kind of an existence in a way that, because in a lot of ways, I think this is about parenting too.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, a mother putting her daughter in this position because she doesn't really have a choice. And what does that feel like for her to have to, navigate that with her daughter? And so it just that image alone created all of this, I should clarify. Walking around is not, obviously that's plenty of people walk around to get around, but it was the hitchhiking piece that was complicated, is her taking her hitchhiking. And when I grew up, hitchhiking, I don't know when it became dangerous. Maybe like in the 90s, or when did all those slasher movies start?
Like the 90s.
Yeah. So this is 80. So this was, it was a mixed bag. I mean, you knew most of the people that you would come across, but it was not entirely safe thing to do.
Yeah, and it's definitely not safe to hitchhike now.
I don't even know if people do they hitchhike still? I don't even know if they do.
I have seen it in Western Mass. I have seen it. They still do.
Yeah. No, I mean, listen, there are, particularly if you are, if the life that you have chosen is one like on the road, just getting, I mean, that's the adventure you choose, getting from one place to the other. And that's part of it, is meeting people and all the other things. So
yeah, just wish there were a safer way to do it. So the relationship that Diamond has with her mother, Anna, is fairly intimate, and I will leave it at that because I don't want to give spoilers. We get a deep dive into the dynamic of their relationship very early in the novel. Why was it important, if you wanted to talk a little bit more about writing a mother-daughter relationship, and why was it important for the reader to experience this type of dynamic prior to getting more of a sense of Diamond's world? So we learn a lot about Diamond and her relationship with her mother before we meet her friends, before we see her bigger world.
Yeah, I mean, I think because really her mother was her entire world. And in many ways, so, the father is missing. And this is also a book about grief in a lot of ways, and grieving and mourning. And Diamond's mother wants to keep her mourning and grief. It's keep it moving and don't look back. And Diamond is still stuck in the middle in a way that she's not, that's not comfortable for her. She still misses her dad. She still wants to know what happened. Will he come back? Well, and so I think that, first of all, I wanted to represent that pull between those two things with the mother. I think that their isolation is so key to the story, because Diamond is going from being a person that feels very alone to not. And so that the relationship that she has with her mother is part of what makes her so isolated, is that together they live an existence where, her mother loves her fiercely. And very much of, my challenge was like, she fails her profoundly and she loves her so much. And I wanted the reader to be able to see both of those things. And so I think that having a relationship to a mother who's troubled in that way, as being part of the thing that she's running from, that she wants to escape, that was also important. This is, like I say in the beginning of the book, this is a story about leaving. This is a story, I was always very clear in my mind what she was running from. And part of it was the just being so enmeshed with the mother. And it wasn't until later on in my writing process that I understood what she was running towards.
I feel like I think there's a new narrative, I believe, on like just mothers and their complicated stories.
Yeah.
And because I'm now noticing, because there's a couple of books that I have running in my head right now, that the mothers aren't perfect. And I think it's a really important genre to explore.
What I appreciate about a lot of the books that are popping into my head about those kinds of mothers is that there's not they don't get redemption. There's not an effort
No.
to, like, over the course of this, they stop drinking, or they, whatever their pain and complication in life is. It's just that, I mean, that's what I tried to do with Ma, is that she just was all of those things. And I didn't want to spend a lot of time unpacking why she was the way she was. And, I really just wanted to show her and how her life was having an impact on her daughter.
Yeah, and I'm glad you did that, because actually one book I'm teaching right now in one of my classes is Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. And there's the very complicated father. And
Yeah.
I love that my students aren't asking these questions about, I want to know the why. I want to know the why. Instead, we're getting, how has the father impacted the two girls? So I love the way that the conversation has gone. Because sometimes, and even I'm teaching Water by the Spoonful by Chiara Alegria Udis in one of my other classes, and there's a mother battling addiction. And students don't ask the why the addiction is happening. They're asking the, what is the impact of the addiction?
I think it's an important thing to note, because I do think that we have more compassion for people who suffer from addiction, just generally as a culture. And so I'm sure that, or I hope that people are bringing that kind of empathy to the book. And so that they're not, there's no, it's a disease. And so people are not, I don't think that people judge it in the same way.
Yeah. So Diamond, I love that she's 16. I'm thinking, back to when I was 16 and all the formative experiences that I had. Like, that was my first big summer away at a summer music camp for 8 weeks, and just all the things that's happened at that age, and all the things that can contribute to identity at the age of 16. You use flashbacks and letters from family members as storytelling devices. How do these storytelling devices contribute to Diamond's first-person narrative? And what type of story do they allow for her to tell?
So that's a great question. I think I mentioned, I started off, this was a coming of age story. Started off with a short story and a coming of age story. And when I realized I wanted to tell a much bigger story, I understood that she was running from a very tough existence, but I didn't know what she was running towards. And I felt she was so completely rootless in the world that she was in, that it became obvious that at least some part of where she was going towards was going to root her in family. And, she didn't have any access to her Black family growing up. And so I went looking for, this was part of my research process. I went looking for information on Black communities in rural New England in the early 20th century. And I really couldn't find much. And so I found a book. I mean, there are pockets. I was looking for something specific. I was looking for a Black community around a mill culture, and they existed in some of the bigger cities, but not in a rural context. And I was most interested in that. And so I found a book about sundown towns, and that book about sundown towns is what really cracked it open for me. And for people listening who don't know what a sundown town is, it's an all-white town by design, whether it's laws and ordinances and violence and threats of hanging and all that kind of thing. And it was often represented by a sign that said, you got to be out by, Black people out by sundown, or, you're going to be killed. So there was a part in the book that talked about exceptions that were made sometimes in these all-white towns that forbade Black people to live in them, where they would allow one or two to stay. And then I decided that I wanted to create a character around one that had been allowed to stay. And I created an entire fictional event that happened where the Black community left. I won't say how or why, but and what that gave me was an opportunity to tell another story about being the only one in a very different context in this very same town. And it all of a sudden gave Diamond a connection. Diamond doesn't talk directly to this, this ancestor, obviously, but she's receiving her letters. And so it's a way for her to kind of be in conversation with the past and her family and this rich, rich history and legacy without there being an actual conversation and without the letters. I mean, I did not set out to write an epistolary book. What I love about using letters to help tell stories is that they don't have to interrupt the action that's happening in the present day. They can help feed it and enrich it and add all of these different layers. And you can see how getting these letters are impacting Diamond as she moves through the story, but they're their own distinct stories as well. So I guess going back to your question, it was, yeah, I mean, as a device, it was just I could get all of these other this is a story about women in this family, and I could tell other stories about women in this family using these different voices and letters.
Yeah, and I also want to shout out that I love that this book is historical fiction. And when I initially wrote the question, which I'll get to it soon, it was hard. It was hard for me to write historical fiction because I was a kid in the 80s. So when I write historical fiction in relation to the 80s, it makes me old, but I am old. So, okay. But it is definitely historical fiction. And I love that you did it through letters because, again, it ties back into Diamond being really, really smart. Because I don't see a lot of kids her age wanting to take the time to read those types of archival things and spend that amount of time. But of course, I think Diamond is that kid who would want to do something like that.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it was also it was giving. There was such a central mystery in her life and such a gaping hole in terms of family that it was not like going to the library and taking out a book. I mean, this was her history. And like you, it's funny. I've been on historical fiction panels and the book has been called historical fiction because of the 80s, which blows my mind. I cannot believe that a book, the 80s, but to your point, I'm also writing from the perspective of someone living in 1915. And so that was a ton of research to make sure that I was getting that right.
Yeah, and Diamond too. And I love Diamond. In thinking back to how I was reading the book and how our ancestors were uncovered. Next, I'll get to my next question. It made me think of episode. I love the series Finding Your Roots, and it made me go, "What if she was sitting down with Dr. Harry Lewis Gates, and some big fact would be revealed, and he'll be like very traumatic. How does this make you feel?" And so every time I was reading this new thing uncovering about Diamond, I literally went to Dr. Gates' voice. How does this make you feel?
I love that show so much, and what I would give to see Diamond sitting up in there. I thought about that show often when I was writing this. Just,
yeah,
for myself, even well, first I have to ask you, because you are a lover of 80s things, did you feel the 80s? Did you get the
oh God, yeah.
Because I love me some 80s, and I really was channeling every. I just digging for every funny detail I could find. So yeah, I think there were a couple things that were happening in my own life at the time that I was writing this. One was I was a producer on this documentary Descendant, which is very much about a community that that through telling their family stories insisted upon a history that people were denying. And my late sister, my sister passed away about 5 years ago. She was our family kind of genealogist. I almost always say gynecologist. She was our family genealogist. And she was uncovering all of this information on the white side of our family, going all the way up to King of Scotland. founding fathers, and and there's so little that we could find on our Black side, and so it felt like such a loss. And I think, as it is from many Black Americans who can't go. I mean, I can go a couple of greats. I have a name of an enslaved man. His name was Rance Newberry, and so I honored him by naming Diamond, giving Diamond his last name. His not his name, but and so I think that I was sort of in a lot. I think I was helping that. It was cathartic for me to give her a history that I myself I didn't have.
I wonder if that's Newby, not Newberry. I was going to say, I wonder if you're connected. Yep, Newberry. If you were connected with another author that was on,
maybe. I haven't done any. I need some finding your roots on that for that, because I do have that name, and I'm pretty sure that's real. And then Patchy. I can go back a couple greats to the South, and my people from Georgia and North Carolina, but that's it.
And I want to be on, before I get to the next question, I want to be on Finding Your Roots so bad. And the reason why is because, Skip Gates, I remember he said that folks who are of multiple generations of African American, we have a certain amount of European ancestry, I think like 12+%. I only have 5% European ancestry, and I'm very African American, to where I've traced the first enslaved ancestor that's been documented by name.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, Dr. Gates, can you explain to me, if this is the thing, how am I only 5% European? Is this because my people fought back? Like, I want to know.
Wow. That's fascinating. That is so fascinating. Do you have siblings?
I do. I have a brother. We're 15 years apart.
Okay. Maybe I know with my siblings and I, who we all share the same parents, those percentages fluctuate also, which is kind of interesting too when you look at the European percentages. The one thing, but that's really interesting that you can go that far back, and that the percentage is so low. Something similar with my dad too, and we are. Depending on, did you use Ancestry.com?
I did.
Yeah. And the pool that they're using, that also changes and shifts, and so the percentages change as their pool that gets bigger. So you should go back and check every now and again.
Yeah, I need to.
Yeah,
I need to.
But I'm very like Congo and West Africa, Nigeria and Ghana, and yeah.
Wow, and it's so interesting that you were writing this book at the same time as working on Descendant, which this, I think, segues really nicely into this.
The end of the process of me writing the book, I was writing, at the same time.
Wow. So I think this segues nicely into this question. Prior to having our guests on Black Writers Read, we ask each of them why they write. Here's what you offered. It's something I wanted to do my whole life. It's the best way I know how to channel the chaos in my mind to understand how I feel. I'm the most honest version of myself when I write. I feel like an artist in many ways, but I think with my fiction, I am most coherent. LOL. Things come together, characters speak to me, ideas find outlets in imaginary worlds. Who was it that said I write so that I can understand my own mind? That's it right there. I also try to write things I myself might want to read, perspectives I feel are not in abundance, or characters who often aren't centered in stories. My parents were activists, so in many ways, writing is my activism. So, in preparation for today, I watched a lot of interviews with you online, and
I'm sorry.
Oh no, this was great because, I got to learn a lot about you, but also you were interviewed and had a chance to talk with some people that I've followed Harriet Cole for a long time, and when I saw that you were interviewed with her, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing! And that conversation was so good.
Yeah, she's incredible.
Yeah. So you both talked about the importance of oral history and storytelling and whose stories need to be told.
Yeah.
Given your mission, and also too, given that you are a documentary filmmaker as well, whose stories would you like to explore and tell? And why is it important to you for these stories to be told?
Oh, yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I I am always, I think I gravitate to telling stories just on a basic level of people who don't get centered in stories. I mean, you know, Black and brown girls in big bodies don't get to be the center of stories, you know?
Mm.
And so I that was very important to me that I do that. And, you know, and so I think that I will always be looking for, yeah, telling untold stories. And I think that the same is, I didn't, this is a much longer conversation, but, I do struggle. My parents were activists, like give their life for the cause kind of activists. And I struggle with like, what is my activism? And so I think I felt proud that I got to tell a part of history in this story, through this story, and then talk about it. That it's not untold history. This history exists, but not, you know. I've never been in front of an audience and talked about the fact that sundown towns were mostly in the North, and the North, they were not also in the North. They were, and I thought that they were in the South. And so there's only the book that I used to research Swift River. There's only one history of sundown town book that exists. It shows up in other forms in different places, and there are plenty. It also shows up in film, and sundown towns were the reason for the Negro Green Book. I mean, so it's a part of our it's a part of our stories and our culture. But the amount of information that I got from this one book that I knew that most people didn't understand, it felt like I had an opportunity through fiction to expose people to a part of history that we don't often hear about. And so in my way, that sort of felt like my activism, and it got me excited to find other parts of our history, particularly since, this is what Harriet and I talked a lot about, is that, for marginalized cultures, often the ways that our history gets carried forward is through oral history.
Yeah.
And oral history is not a lesser history. That was the lesson of Descendant. And so looking in non-traditional places for record of our past and our truths is also very important to me. And I spent a lot of time in my research process trying to find places that weren't the norm. And so I think I would love to do more of that. I would love to discover more and see if any of it inspires a new story.
I have two more questions for you. Fiction is your chosen genre. What are some advantages and challenges in writing fiction, especially as a Black woman author? And in the case of Swift River, which is historical fiction for those who would be reading the book. So I just want to know, because fiction, I'm not going to lie, because I do poetry and playwriting, and I've dabbled in fiction. And I think fiction, you have to have such a gift and such an imagination to create rich worlds. Whereas, and the genres I do, I write very observantly, as opposed to my dreams are vivid, but for some reason my imagination can't get on the page. And so whenever I have fiction authors on, I love asking them the question about genre and what are some advantages and challenges, especially, and I'm going to revise this question a little bit, especially given that you are a Black woman author, and two, your first book made it so big, it's with one of the big 5 publishers. It's yes, I would love for you to talk a little bit about fiction as a genre from where you sit.
Oh, I find writing just period hard as hell, and I find fiction, it's just hard. And I think I'm trying to figure out a way to pull apart. I've done, I've written poetry, I've done a little bit of essay writing, and I don't know. I think we're all storytellers, and we find the right ways for our stories to be expressed. And for me, as I was saying before, fiction was the way that I was able to be the most honest, for whatever reason, in channeling other other voices and characters and worlds. I have just always been a storyteller, since I was a very young child. And that was, my parents, our house was filled with books, bursting with books, and they read to us and sang to us. And so the idea of being a story, and I feel like, I grew up listening to, uncles tell stories on porches, and it's just storytelling as an art form has always been something that I've been drawn to. So I don't even know that it was consciously. Well, no, yes, I was about to say it wasn't a choice, but it was absolutely a choice, because I worked in TV and film for a long time, and I even understood. Books were the first thing that I wanted to do. Books were the things I wanted to write. A novel. I wanted to write fiction, and so I guess as a Black woman specifically, I don't know. I don't know. I guess the ways that I would separate out challenges really have more to do. I think every writer will tell you that. I think that it's hard. It's really hard. It's about developing your practice, and that takes a long time, or at least did for me anyway. And then I think that when it breaks down along racial and socioeconomic lines, it's more about support and support systems, and how do you get support as a writer? And I think that it's often that can be very challenging. And how do you? But I think as it relates specifically to this book, what was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. And I was having a nice little coffee fit.
Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Thank you, StreamYard, for being able to mute.
Oh my goodness.
Like, what are some advantages?
Some advantages. I mean, I just think I just feel like I was very, very lucky to be privileged enough to focus in ways that I don't know if it's an advantage, but I know that I feel like I had advantages. I worked, because I came to this later in life. I could support myself in a different way. So I wasn't like a young struggling writer. I had all my struggle that I, throughout many years of building up a career. And so, I don't know. I feel like the luckiest person in the world that I get to make a living doing this. I can barely believe that I don't know if I'm articulating the advantages of writing fiction. Do you mean the advantages over other genres, or just?
Yeah, I would love to hear over other genres. Yeah.
It's so hard to say. I mean, I feel like, each is such a specific, brilliant. I mean, like what you do as a poet, like I couldn't even begin to compare. I mean, you're telling stories in just a different way, and you're tapping into different. You're taking your experience and translating it in a different way, and it's hard to compare, I would say. I just have so much, particularly the two that particularly poets. I write with poetry. I write with books at my side, and I often I'm just so in awe of what poets are able to do with language, and I like to hear have to have a rhythm and a musicality in my writing. So I try and pull from that. But let me think. I have to think about that a little bit more. How to think about advantages and different disadvantages, because I honestly, I'm thinking about it as it relates to film and television, and I made short films for many years before I made feature length films, and people would always say, "Oh, is it easier?" And I don't think so. I mean, I think it's sort of like you have to get so much information and backstory, and like you have to do so much more with less time, that it's just different. It's not easier or better. It really is its own specific art form, and I think that you have to work very hard to do both. It's not about
Yeah, and I think with short form of anything, because I wrote short plays, like a 10-minute first, and for me, short form of anything is significantly harder because you have to compress so
Yeah.
much of a story into like a couple of
true.
minutes.
It's true. Oh, 10-minute
Yeah.
plays are especially hard. So that then you're relying on dialogue. You got to do a lot with your dialogue in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah, and I'd like to close this out with, what is next for you, Essie, and how can the Black Writers Read community support you on this journey?
Oh, thank you. That is so generous. Well, I feel like you all live in places that I want to be, which is in higher education. I mean, I would love, I'm just starting so spreading the word in academia. I would love to see Swift River have a life being taught. It's happening in a couple of colleges this year, but I would love to see more of that. So just spreading the word in that way, and writing reviews helps immensely. And what am I doing next? I mean, I'm as soon as my paperback comes out, which it's actually on May 6th. It's in 2 weeks. Is it 2 weeks today? 2 weeks from today. I'm going to slowly start to transition from being in what I call author mode, which is the business of books, to being a little bit more firmly back in writer mode. And I am, I have an idea for my next book, but I also know that you show up with an idea and then it changes radically after you get into it. So I have characters that I really love that I need to kind of spend some time with. And so that's what I'm doing next. After I'm touring a little bit for the paperback release. And then I'll continue to do speaking engagements, but for the most part, I want to get back to work. I want to get back to focus on writing my next book.
Yes, and congratulations on having that idea. Because for folks who aren't familiar with writing, like even just having the idea percolating,
it's true.
Hard.
It's really hard, and it's there. It's like it's that it's something when it starts speaking to you when you least expect it. It's just and also it's like your writer brain becomes alive in a different way when you're excited about an idea. Like you start to hear, for me anyway, I hear conversations and people talking, and I'm noticing things that I know are going to feed me in some way, that are going to help me think about how to put this book together and how to populate it with interesting voices.
Yeah. So Essie, thank you so much for being on this evening.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much for supporting me as an author. This is, like I said before, this is such an important platform, and what you do is very important. So I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. So I will take you off and I'll quickly check in before we wrap up this evening.
Okay.
Yes. So thank you all for joining me for episode 22 of season 5 of Black Writers Read. I'll be back on Saturday, May 3rd with Southern Gothic writer Eden Royce. Yes, Southern Gothic. I'm so excited for the genre. Support Black Writers Read by subscribing to my YouTube channel, where many of you are joining us today, or the audio podcast, which is available wherever you get your catalog of podcasts. And please drop a review of Black Writers Read on one of these platforms, because as supporting me as a reviewer and a subscriber, you're helping to grow the community, and more importantly, you're helping people to find me. Visit blackwritersread.com to learn more about the podcast. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening, and more importantly, for ensuring that Black authors continue to matter. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.